Morning glory, America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt, live from California this morning. I know that many of you could not watch the 2-hour fiasco that was President Biden's press conference yesterday. And so if all you did was watch the liberal or the left-wing media, all you will know is that he made it 2 hours standing up. That's not the point. He could have gone 4 hours. He could have gone 6 hours. He could have gone 8 hours. It doesn't matter. What matters is that in 14 seconds, he undid 40 years of American national security policy post the end of the Cold War. Let's play cut number 38.
So I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades. And it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
That language, a minor incursion, dismayed Ukrainians on the front line, shocked our allies, and sent a shudder throughout the West. What exactly is a minor incursion? Would China swallowing up Taiwan be a minor incursion? Would China sailing for the disputed Senkaku Islands off of Japan be a minor incursion? I mean, would Lithuania be a minor incursion if Putin decided to invade there? It's astonishing. It hasn't happened in the history of the United States, where we abandoned our ally publicly from the podium in the White House. But yesterday, Joe Biden did just that. Now, I'll spend most of this show talking about that 14-second clip, but that wasn't the only thing, America. It was disorganized, rambling, a disaster, a train wreck of a press conference. And still we saw legacy media and the leftists in the media go out there and tell you the sky is green. Joe Biden did a great job. No, he didn't. He should and did scare our allies. He should and did upset Democrats. He should and did confirm what center-right people like me and Republicans like you and conservatives like you have said since Donald Trump left the White House. We don't have anyone in the Oval Office. You didn't like the mean tweets, right? Well, now, what do you think about minor incursions? Or what do you think about the president saying this, cut number 16?
If I could, sir, and I should have said this before, Francesca Chambers-McClatchy, how do you plan to win back moderates and independents who cast a ballot for you in 2020, but polls indicate are unhappy with the way you're doing your job now?
I don't believe the polls.
He doesn't believe in polls. He doesn't believe in reality. He does not believe in people who do not want to mask their children. He does not believe in anything that is obviously in front of his face, including the results in the Virginia election. The president is simply not dealing with the reality that is there. He's dealing with the reality in his head. And his former Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, who served both President Bush and President Obama, has said Joe Biden hasn't been right about anything big in national security for 40 years. On the domestic side, he flat out lied. He lied. Cut number 9.
Maybe I'm just being too much of an optimist. Remember how we thought not that many people were going to show up to vote in the middle of a pandemic? We had the highest voter turnout in the history of the United States of America. Well, I think if, in fact, no matter how hard they make it for minorities to vote, I think you're going to see them willing to stand in line and defy the attempt to keep them from being able to vote. I think you're going to see the people we're trying to keep from being able to show up, showing up and making the sacrifice that needs to be made in order to change the law back to what it should be.
Yeah, it's so astonishing. No matter how hard they try to prevent minorities from voting, he is simply making that up. And when the United States Senate rejected the effort to federalize elections, they saved elections in the United States. So yesterday was a low point for a presidency that's made an addiction out of low points. And we should not avert our gaze. By the way, President Biden said he's going to go out and campaign with Democrats. Do you remember that Stacey Abrams wouldn't show up with him in Georgia last week? Democrats don't want to go near President Biden. Did you see that he said he's running again? That's a joke. Did you see he's got complete confidence in Kamala Harris? That's a joke. It was all a joke. It was an astonishing, his discussion at the beginning. We assumed that he prepared the beginning very, very carefully. He said that Build Back Better will help lower the deficit, will help cure inflation. Is he nuts? The idea that he wants to spend $2 trillion more when gas costs $5.05 a gallon in California and is going higher is crazy. So I am going to talk today with Senator Rand Paul, with Senator Marsha Blackburn, with Senator Bill Hagerty, with President Trump's former national security advisor, all about this press conference. But the key thing you need to take away from it is he went 2 hours, and every minute that ticked by on the clock was a disaster. Every single minute of that press conference was a disaster. Now, on the actual delivery, that too was a disaster. I know his leftist buddies on Twitter. I know the spin on MSNBC. I know what PBS said. Oh, he went 2 hours. Wasn't that amazing? You saw it. If you saw it, you saw an old guy fumbling, stumbling, trying to read occasionally from notes. They had given him a little binder with 5 or 6 pages to flip around. And when he could find the right page, his head went down and he just read the notes without, by the way, much in the way of delivering. Now, he's not a professional talker, although he's been talking for 50 years. I'm a professional talker. I've been doing this for 21 years on the Salem Radio Network, 21 years. So I can do a monologue without notes for 8 minutes without even blinking. But I expect the President of the United States to be crisp. I expect the President of the United States to be on point, and I expect the President of the United States not to abandon our allies. He abandoned Afghanistan to the Taliban. He abandoned the Ukrainians to Putin. That's Joe Biden's first year in a nutshell. And he's abandoned you to gas prices, which are sending your dollars out the window of your car like not since President Obama's early years. And indeed, we are back to the Carter inflation of 40 years ago. There was not a plan. There wasn't any kind of a concession. There was no admission of gross incompetence. I don't really know what else to say. I went on Special Report last night. So let's just play what I had to say on Special Report. I was first asked about Ukraine, cut number 31.
For the panel, Hugh, there were a number of things to take from that. First of all, the fact that the president did a news conference that was almost 2 hours, breaking the record of news conferences by President Trump and President Obama by 20 plus minutes. And he did take a lot of questions, but there were a lot of significant moments in that news conference.
It was, as Senator Sass said, a train wreck. Now, we will be talking about the domestic political fallout from this for a long time. I think he could dump below 30% of the result. But the key takeaway is he gave a green light to Vladimir Putin to have an incursion of some sort. So President Biden has thoroughly abandoned our Ukrainian allies today as he did our Afghanistan allies in August and September. It is on a par with a speech that not many people remember. Dean Acheson in 1950 did not include Korea in our world of security perimeter, and the North Koreans invaded the South Koreans. And it's been a legendary mistake. I think this press conference is going to go down in national security infamy for that wildly phrased invitation of Vladimir Putin to come on down and take part of Ukraine. I also got to talk about that part of the president's press conference where he simply lied about Republicans, cut number 32.
That's an interesting point about his clarification of that speech in Atlanta and how he sees it about what he said versus how people perceived it, in his words, Hugh.
Well, he made 3 attempts, by my count, it might have been 4 or 5, to try and tell us what he said when we all heard what he said. He eventually ended up blaming Mitch McConnell for what he said. But then he went back and said it again at the end of that chaotic, I mean, it was a chaotic, desperate press conference. That will not be, people will read the transcript of that for decades and they will not find a theme. But what Ari nailed as the 3 takeaways are the takeaways. The one I want to emphasize, Brett, is he also said no matter how hard they tried to make it for minorities to vote, that is a slander as equal to the slander as the one that he launched in Atlanta. And Mitt Romney and the rest of the Republicans who are outraged are still outraged tonight. There's lots more to talk about this fiasco of a press conference, and we will. We will talk about it throughout most of the show. Dr. Michael Oren from Israel, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, Senators Blackburn and Hagerty from Tennessee, former Senator Jim Talent, of course, President Trump's former National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien, all coming up on today's Hugh Hewitt Show.
So I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
A minor incursion, a brand new category of adventurism for Russia to exploit. As I said on Brett Baer's show yesterday, does a minor incursion include China swallowing Taiwan? If they take the Aleutian Islands, doesn't matter. So Dr. Michael Oren, one of Israel's leading public intellectuals, one of its finest diplomats, joins me now from Israel. Good morning, Dr. Oren. How are you?
Hi, Hugh. Good to be with you, as always.
I'm wondering what a minor incursion from Hezbollah from the north in Israel or from Hamas to its south into Israel would mean.
Well, it sounds like an oxymoron. It's sort of like, civil war. What's a minor incursion? Is it 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers? Is it 400 people killed, 1,000 people killed? And it's something that Israel would have to take into consideration. At what point would, say, a Hezbollah barrage at Israel justify a major Israeli response? Would it be 10 missiles, 20 missiles, 100 missiles? And Hamas with the same type of calculation. A superpower of the United States should be, I believe, unequivocal in its position about the violation of any sovereign borders, certainly the sovereign borders of an allied nation.
Yeah, last night on Special Report on Fox, I brought up Dean Acheson's infamous 1950 press club speech, and one of my friends said, nobody knows what that means. I'm sure you do, but for the benefit of the audience, in 1950, Dean Acheson said, America's security perimeter extends here, here, and here, and he didn't include South Korea, and very soon thereafter, North Korea invaded. When the President of the United States says stuff, people notice. Is that correct still, Michael Oren?
Of course, and we've had my colleagues and I have had conversations with American security and military officials where they talk about withdrawal from Syria, withdrawal from Afghanistan, and sort of containing those withdrawals. And our response has always been, what universe do you live in? You withdraw from Afghanistan, then the Chinese reach a conclusion. The Russians reach a conclusion. The theater here is global, and everyone is looking to see how America reacts in one area and drawing conclusions. And I think that, what can I say? I think the Taiwanese should be sitting uneasily today.
And so should the United Arab Emirates. This week, the Houthi proxies of the Iranian mullahs fired a bunch of drones, killed 3 UAE people, blew up some transports, I believe. Is that a minor incursion, Michael Oren? Because if you live with that one time, you're inviting it a second time, I think.
I don't think there's such a thing as a minor incursion. I think that, if your borders are breached, if your citizens are fired at, that's aggression. That's a casus belli. And the reaction you're going to see from Gulf states like the UAE is not only, say, to fight back, but it's also to negotiate with Iran, which is even more troubling from an Israeli perspective, because increasing numbers of people in the Middle East, Sunni Arabs, are concluding that there's no United States there. There's no, as once was said infamously about Oakland, there's no there. There's no United States there. And they want to hedge their bets a little bit by perhaps opening up a discussion with Iran. One of the interesting things I saw was the New York Times is that some of the commentators from the known segment of the media community are actually welcoming the beginning of talks between Sunni Arabs and Iran. It's sort of a process of reconciliation. From Israel, it's seen as the breakdown of American credibility in the Middle East.
After Donald Trump put together the Abraham Accords, they are fraying, and they are fraying because the Gulf states know. Well, actually, the Gulf state that matters most to me is the UAE, and it figures out that Israel is the partner that it wants to have. Let me turn, though, to China. It's just an open invitation to China to go after the Senkaku Islands, is it not? I mean, minor incursion. To go after the Philippines fishing grounds, minor incursion. I'm hoping the Aleutians aren't on the minor incursion category.
Yeah, I don't know. It begs the question, was Pearl Harbor a minor incursion?
It's only one port.
Was Gettysburg a minor incursion?
Turn it into Pennsylvania.
By the Confederacy.
Antietam, minor incursion, bloodiest day in American history.
Yeah.
So let me get to the question I wanted to ask you about. Bibi Netanyahu is going to plead guilty, then he's not going to plead guilty, then he's going to plead guilty. Honestly, reading the Times of Israel gives people a headache. What's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think there's an attempt by Netanyahu to do something what I think is very clever from his point of view, which is to strike a deal. It's referred to here as like a Nixon-like deal, where he spares the country further division, because if he stands trial and goes to prison, a big chunk of the country is going to be up in arms. If he doesn't stand trial, goes to prison, another set of the country is going to be up in arms. To spare the country that, you cut a deal where Bibi leaves politics. And the question is whether he leaves politics with the addition of what's called moral turpitude. You can't say that 10 times fast. Moral turpitude, which would prohibit him from re-entering politics for 7 years, which would bring him up to age 79.
Well, then he's just like Joe Biden. He's just getting started. I have a technical question. Does it prohibit him from being the president of Israel?
Oh, yeah, only after 7 years.
Even because it's not elected, right? It's appointed.
He doesn't want that. He wants to come back after 2 years.
No, I don't. I just can't imagine Bibi Netanyahu going into the wilderness for 7 years. We'll find out. Michael Oren, follow him on Twitter. Dr. Michael Oren. Dr. Michael Oren on Twitter. Hour number 2 of the Hugh Hewitt Show coming up. Morning, Glory America. Bonjour, hi, Canada. Hugh Hewitt live with a focus on the Beltway this morning. Next hour is Senators Blackburn and Hagerty join me this hour. I begin with Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Good morning, Hugh. Thanks for having me.
Now, Senator, you and I have had a few mix-ups over the years, but we've always been civil to each other when we disagree. I know that you try your best in the Senate to be that way towards Dr. Fauci, but I want to go back to last week, but I want a predicate first. Am I not correct that you were on the baseball field when the Bernie Sanders supporter tried to kill you and dozens of other Republicans?
Absolutely. I was 10 feet from one of the staffers who was shot. I was about 20 yards from Steve Scalise, and the remarkable thing is that not one of us said it was Bernie Sanders' fault, and people almost died. It was a horrific thing. The guy came there with a list of people to kill, to assassinate, and yet Dr. Fauci now thinks that he can, come forward, and he's had a death threat, and so that death threat is because people object to him or disagree with him. I had 34 death threats last week, 34 that we referred to the Capitol Hill police. So, it's sort of, we don't want violence on Dr. Fauci. We want a civil debate. But the main reason that it devolves into a personal sort of attack back and forth is that he won't answer the question. He deflects from the question. Not one person in the mainstream media realizes even what the question was that I asked him.
I don't know the question. I'm not legacy media. All I know is that it is absurd to blame anyone in public life for the fringe elements that inflict all of us with those kinds of, I've been in the media for 30 years. Of course I've gotten those letters. I knew I wouldn't have imagined you had 34 in a week. That's kind of a record, Dr. Paul, isn't it?
I think it's a record for me, and it shows how inflamed the public is on both sides. But I also get hundreds of people every day who say someone has to ask these tough questions. The question I asked Dr. Fauci was, is it an abusive office to use your $420,000 salary to go after your political enemies, your scientific opponents? Is it wrong to have sort of an enemies list of people that you and Dr. Collins basically conspire to ruin their reputations, not really in journals with facts or arguments, but in the lay press? They go to The Nation. They didn't go to Science. They went to the Nation, the progressive magazine, The Nation, to go after their opponents and then call them names. Their opponents teach at Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford, the three main authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. They went after them to smear them and to try to ruin their reputations. And I think that is just despicable, and it should be called out.
Dr. Fauci used to come on this show. And like with you, I have my disagreements, and they're always civilly expressed. But after I wrote a Washington Post column calling on him to resign, his office said he would never come back on my show. I think the phrase was, "Are you kidding?" after what you wrote. And Dr. Walensky has turned down time after time. Now, I talk to 6 million people every morning. How can a public health officer expect to influence public health when they don't talk to the public except on the Sunday shows, Dr. and Senator Paul?
Yeah, and see, my point is this, is as far as sort of vaccine hesitancy, I'm pro-vaccine. We helped to get my in-laws vaccinated. My wife's been vaccinated. But I'm also for discernment, and I'm also for freedom and freedom of choice. But the thing is there are a lot of people who are conservative who might listen to the show who are hesitant. They should try to convince us with facts and explain to us the discrepancies and then try to persuade us, and people will be open. I'm willing to tell people that there are advantages to getting vaccinated, but I'm also willing to be honest with them and tell you that it's malpractice to vaccinate your 10-year-old boy without knowing whether he's had COVID. I think it's absolutely malpractice, and I wouldn't do it. And I think if you don't individualize your care, if you say that an 80-year-old should be treated the same as a 10-year-old, you're not a physician. You're now sort of a bureaucrat, just sort of wanting to universalize things because it's easier than thinking about the individual risks of the patient.
You just hit one of my red buttons, Doctor, Dr. Senator, I like to say, because I have 3 grandchildren, all of whom are in elementary school or preschool. They've all had COVID, and my daughter has searched in vain for a word from CDC on when or if those children should receive a vaccine. They won't answer. They will not acknowledge that they do not know, and they won't be as blunt as you, which is don't do it.
And here's the thing is the facts are out there, and it's becoming more and more well known that there is a risk of myocarditis, particularly for boys. It's about 1 in 3,000 to 1 in 6,000 by some estimates. So that's infrequent, but that's much rarer than actually dying from COVID. For a child under 18 to die is about 1 in a million. So any honest parents would want to weigh those risks. It's even less dying from COVID or getting COVID if you've already had it. So really people ought to be able to think, and they ought to be able to make the choices for their children without the government telling them what to do.
Now, we actually have, I believe it's beyond argument, that Dr. Fauci is an impediment to educating the American public about health risks. And God forbid if there were another biohazard now, if there was another public health crisis, no one would believe him, or the people that would believe him are 35% to 40%. Is that an acceptable status quo?
No, and I think the main reason I oppose him is not to win the argument, although I think we are winning the argument. The main reason I oppose him and keep going at him on the facts, particularly the origin of the virus, is we could get a much worse virus the next time there's a leak from a lab. This one has a 1% mortality, but that still means, 5-6 million people died in the world. We could have a 15% mortality or a 50% mortality. People need to realize there was an op-ed in the Washington Post about 2 months ago by an MIT professor who I don't think is a Republican or a partisan, who said that this type of research is so risky that we are gambling with civilization. That's a pretty profound thing to do, and yet Fauci still continues to be an advocate of giving money to the Chinese, doing research for the Chinese, but also he's an advocate of creating viruses that don't exist in nature. I think it's foolhardy. I think it's very risky. And the main reason I continue to go after him is he has not acknowledged that he made a mistake, and he's not acknowledged that we should reassess at all doing this risky research.
The gain-of-function research conversation I had with him was misleading at best. Let me ask you about Dr. Walensky. I don't know if she's a Republican or Democrat. All I know is that she is not competent at messaging. She might be a fine doctor. My doctors are great, too. I'm not sure if they could ever do the Senate testimony or persuade anyone of anything. I just know they're good doctors. Have you come to the conclusion that Dr. Walensky should step down as well?
I haven't spent as much time there, mainly because I think there needs to be one focus where we focus, and there is really one person in charge of the pandemic, and that has been Dr. Fauci. I think the main complaint, like in the last hearing, was over whether there's enough testing. And I think people miss the boat a little bit. They're like, why can't the government make more tests? The question should be, or the acknowledgement should be, that socialism doesn't work. So it doesn't work in the economy, but it doesn't work in medicine. So if you put the government in charge of monoclonal antibodies, inevitably politics will enter into it, and they'll say, well, why are we sending them to deplorable people in Florida who are not vaccinated, who are Republicans? And so politics enters into distribution, but also socialism is just not very good at distributing things. The other thing is it's been bad advice from Dr. Fauci why there's a shortage of tests. If you talk to the Great Barrington Declaration people, they'll say that we should target people who are sick and who are vulnerable to help, that we shouldn't test everyone on the planet 3 times a week, and you shouldn't be testing people who are not sick. So the thing is we are wasting so many tests with bad advice, but then the socialist aspect of the production and the distribution being from the government, will inevitably lead to shortages or surpluses.
That's well put. I want to stress the point for bringing you on today, which is that you don't encourage violence against anyone. Nobody does. That you talk to Bernie Sanders every day, though Bernie Sanders people try to kill you on the softball field. I need to turn to President Biden's disaster of a press conference yesterday. It will forever be the minor incursion press conference, but he was also incoherent on the COVID. What did you make of that? And by the way, congratulations on saving the filibuster last night. But what did you make of that press conference?
You know, it's rambling and disjointed enough that it's really hard to get a coherent message out of it. I think really for the good of the country, because the thing about foreign policy, as I know you know, is there are things you say, there are things you do to try to influence other countries, and they are influenced by your public pronouncements. And in some ways, that's all you have. You have the threat of military might, but you also have the influence of what you say. So you can't be sending a muddled message or a message of, oh, well, it may not be too big a deal, if there's a Russian incursion. So I think that it's a mistake for him to be out in front. It's dangerous to the country, and I think we're stuck with him in all likelihood till 2024, and I think it would be good for the country for him not to speak and not to appear in public.
I agree. Last question, Senator Paul. Minor incursion. Do you think that category includes China swallowing Taiwan or Lithuania being taken over by Russia? What does that category include?
Well, I think it's just an awful statement for him to have made, and I think that I don't know that there's any way to sort of justify or pull it back. There are realistic expectations to what will happen in different various, areas of war around the world, but telegraphing exactly what's going to happen is not a great idea.
Senator Rand Paul, thank you for joining me. Always a pleasure. Keep coming back. I'll be right back, America, on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by former Missouri Senator Jim Talent. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
I'm fine. You? How are you this morning?
I am exercised because of what Joe Biden said yesterday. Here's the heart and soul of it. Cut number 38.
I think what you're going to see is that Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
All right, Senator Talent, what is a minor incursion? Is China swallowing Taiwan or the Senkaku Islands a minor incursion? Is Lithuania a minor incursion? What is that?
In this context, it's, for example, sending Russian troops explicitly into the Donbass region. It's establishing a land bridge to Crimea. I mean, there's always been a substantial possibility that what Putin was really planning was a lesser military invasion. And Biden just greenlighted it, is what he did. And it was obviously something he was not supposed to say, because it took Jen Psaki about 30 seconds to put out a clarifying thing, which really just said he didn't say what he said.
Senator Paul was on. Senator Paul was on earlier today. He urged Joe Biden to stay out of sight. I've never heard anything like it. He said he's got to stay out of sight. It's dangerous. It's rambling. This kind of thing informs Putin.
Oh, it's extremely dangerous. It's extremely dangerous because now there's this, well, among other things, there's now this huge round now of phone calls that are going to have to go on with all the NATO allies. Because I think Biden is telling the truth when he said that the allies are divided over that sort of thing. And so now we're going to get, all of Blinken's people are going to have to be on the phone saying, no, he didn't really mean that, which is exactly what Putin wants, confusion in the alliance. Putin tested him and is testing him. And one of the tests is, can the United States respond in a coherent and consistent way and pull the allies together? And this has the tendency to blow all that up now.
I've been reading General McMaster's Dereliction of Duty book, and in it he recounts how a young Jack Kennedy, an inexperienced Jack Kennedy, screwed up the Bay of Pigs. So instantly, Khrushchev tested him in Cuba. That is what's going to happen. This is not... The Chinese don't